The controversial history surrounding the 1943 Volyn tragedy is making headlines in Ukraine and Poland. The Polish Parliament's Sejm passed a resolution on July 22 calling the tragedy a genocide of Poles organized by Ukrainians. And just to remind that in 1943, under the German Nazi occupation, there were different insurgency movements in the western part of Ukraine. Some of them were organized by Ukrainian nationalists, and there were also numerous detachments of Armia Krajova who were fighting for the independent Poland against German occupation. And in 1943, the tragedy happened, which is called actually Volyn Massacre in both countries, but both countries lay blame on each other.
And there is, as often happens in such a historical events, a lot of speculation with the numbers of killed. It's always a very political story. So, for instance, there is an official data from Poland where you speak about 100,000 of the Polish citizens killed. You see the Ukrainian statistic where you have way less people and a bit more from the Ukrainian side. When you really talk to independent historians, and as we really try, we see a totally different numbers. They are still very high. I should also explain that for the Ukrainian society, it happened to be a smaller story than to the Polish, probably because also it happened during the time of the Second World War. It's still not very much investigated, especially those that events which were happening in the Western Ukraine. Not many people really see it as a legacy of the Ukrainian state. But to understand that, that story which had become the political story and important for the Ukrainian-Polish relations, we talked to Polish and Ukrainian historians. So first we talked to Andriy Portnov, who is a brilliant Ukrainian historian based in Berlin, but really digging into this story. So that's what he said to us.
I would say that in very general terms, the very issue of Volhynia, or more broadly of history, Second World War history, or just history, Polish society and Polish politics as well, is much more concerned with it in comparison to the Ukrainian society and Ukrainian politics. I would dare to say that a lot of our politicians, I mean Ukrainian politicians, just have no idea what happened there, why it's so important, because this topic is very important for the Polish image of the Second World War, and so on. Looking at the reactions by President of Ukraine or the Minister of the Foreign Affairs, we could say that they were, let's say, pretty, I would say, correct, moderate, which is important. And they tried to avoid this primitive narrative of, you know, like, offending or feeling guilty, non-guilty, and so on. That's actually what happened to Hopko comments and also some other comments. But there is one institution in Ukraine, state institution, which is pretty problematic in this particular context as well. This institution is called the Ukrainian Institute for National Remembrance, or for national memory. So if you look at the reactions by this institute and its director, Volodymyr Vetrovich, we should say that the language used there and the approaches proposed there, they were among the arguments broadly used in the Polish debate to stress that the formulations should be much stronger than some other Polish experts or politicians supposed. So in other words, I would dare to say we could, let's say, accept it, that the general line of the Ukrainian Institute of National Remembrance seems to be highly problematic and even destructive for Ukrainian-Polish relations. And that's a big problem, because then we have a next question. Okay, if there is a kind of maybe not contradiction, but let's say tension between the position of this institute and the narrative applied by President, Minister of the Foreign Affairs, and so on. I would say that's a topic to be discussed in Ukrainian politics, because the potential destructive effects of the initiatives of the Ukrainian Institute of National Remembrance were never seriously discussed politically. And that's a problem. And let us be frank, probably I should tell it, if you look at the international discourse, at the publication also in English, German, French language media, we will see that the image of the Institute and its activities is very negative. And this negative image plays some role in, like the general perception of Ukraine in the West. So that's a serious problem. And we should probably start talking openly about it.
As also what we understand, the big, claim and advice from the historians is to really separate the politics and the history, and probably the best thing Ukraine could do is really to have a proper archaeological research, to really at least, first of all, estimate the number of the people killed, which is still the case for the speculations.
And we now have a expert in Polish-Ukrainian relations, Mr. Adamski, join us from Warsaw via Skype. Thank you for being with us, Mr. Adamski. And the first question is, why now? Why was it in July 2016 that the Polish Sejm finally has adopted this resolution?
Good evening. I think there are two reasons. One of them is the reaction on the Ukrainian politics of memory. I mean, so-called decommunization law, which were adopted by Verkhovna Rada in the spring of the last year. And in one of this law, there's let's say, a legal ban on criticism towards the Ukrainian Insurgent Army. And so putting in questions of the sense of its activity. And as far as, and since in the Polish society, and also, of course, among historians, there is an absolute consensus that it is the Ukrainian Insurgent Army, UPA, which is responsible for the massacre. I think the Ukrainian laws have radicalized Polish public opinion and, of course, the attitude of the political elites. And the second reason is, I would say, it is more internal, with regard to Poland. Namely, in 2013, when we had a 70th anniversary of this event, then the people who suffered during the massacre, or their families, or many intellectuals, called for recognizing this massacre as genocide. But then in the Polish government, let's say, listened to the arguments of the Ukrainians, which argued that in the difficult time of negotiation about association agreement, in Poland we shouldn't use such stigmatizing term as genocide. And then the Sejm adopted a very similar resolution, which actually in the legal terms means the same, with the term that the Volyn Massacre was a crime with hallmark of genocide. So crime with all hallmarks of genocide. But then the opposition, which now forms the government, Law and Justice, criticized this let's say, legal euphemism, and then they promised to adopt a new resolution, and it happened now.
Lukasz, we have pretty, really very dubious discourse in Ukraine. At the same time, you do have the Institute of the Memory, which claim for renaming the streets for the name of the Ukrainian Resistance Army or Ukrainian Nationalist Army streets, with Bandera streets and the others. At the same time, rather moderate reaction from the Ukrainian, high-level officials like the President, Minister for Foreign Affairs. But what we are concerned and interested, it's what impact it would have to growing xenophobia in the Polish society, because we do hear that, there is growing anti-Ukrainian sentiment, in the urge of these events, connected to the whole change in the political elite in Poland.
So there were only several incidents, and I'm not sure if they are connected to each other. But what is certain is that the level of positive attitude towards the Ukrainians dwindled. And dwindled in the last year, and this is unfortunately not a positive development. Why? Why it dwindled? Why it diminished? Because an average Polish citizen knows very little about Ukraine, but of course he knows about the war in the east, about the Russian aggression, and about reluctance of Ukrainian elites to recognize the responsibility of Ukrainian Insurgent Army. Since this is actually the old problem in the Polish-Ukrainian relations, so these discussions began in the 1990s, and still there is no visible progress. I think just that the Polish public opinion lost patience. But I'm not sure, I don't see, let's say, anti-Ukrainian moods as such or xenophobia. It is rather this incident which happened, one of them might have been a provocation, and the other perhaps a ban for entry of one of the Ukrainian musicians might happen because of, let's say, failure of the Polish administration. So I'm not sure.
Yeah, Lukasz, thanks a lot for explaining and elaborating on this topic. We'll follow it. So thanks. With us, it was the Polish expert on Polish-Ukrainian relations, Lukasz Adamski, and we'll be back in a second.